Fellow Toastmasters and honored guests, Will Rogers, the great American humorist of the Great Depression, said a lot of things that we still remember today. Will Rogers said, "I don't belong to any sort of organized political party. I'm a Democrat." Will Rogers said that good judgment comes from experience, and most of that comes from bad judgment. Will Rogers said, "Never pass up a good chance to shut up." Will Rogers said, "If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging." Will Rogers said the greatest sort of doctor is the veterinarian, because the other doctors can ask the patient what's wrong, veterinarian has to just know. Will Rogers said that there are two theories on how to argue with a woman. Neither of them work. And Will Rogers said that men learn in three different ways. Most men learn by reading. A select few learn by observation. And the rest of them just got to pee on the electric fence. Will Rogers was born in 1879 in the Oklahoma Territory. He was the son of a prominent rancher, and both his parents had Cherokee blood. Will Rogers said that his family didn't come over on the Mayflower, they met the boat. Will Rogers was a great horseman and a phenomenal roper. He could do anything with the rope. He was a very talented fella. He decided to cash in on the great American entertainment export of the time, which was the Wild West Show. And at a Wild West show in Johannesburg, South Africa, Will Rogers learned his first great lesson about show business. He arrived and found they already had a fellow who did rope tricks. And he wasn't nearly as good as Will, but he was a great showman. And he learned that it's not enough just to be good at what you do. You have to forge a connection with your audience. Will Rogers learned very quickly how to do that. He was on the American vaudeville stage starting in 1905. A lot of his early act actually included him riding around on his horse, because vaudeville stages were big and obviously pretty strongly built. Within 10 years, he was a star of the New York stage as well in the Ziegfeld Follies. He was signed as a columnist for the New York papers, and his syndicated column was eventually read by 30 million Americans every day at breakfast, just to see what Will Rogers would say. His act by that time wasn't a lot of rope and riding. He would just twirl his rope while he told jokes and stories. He would say, "What should I talk about? Well, all I know is what I read in the papers." Will Rogers said of foreign entanglements, if you get in trouble 5,000 miles away from home, you had to have been looking for it. Will Rogers says, "I'll say this about the United States Senate. They start every session with a prayer and end with an investigation." Will Rogers said that Alexander Hamilton started the U.S. Treasury with nothing, and that's as close as we've been since to being even. Will Rogers was even, and some people don't know this, a big movie star. He made 50 silent films, but it was when films started to have sound that his career really took off. His most famous role was in the 1933 version of State Fair. He played Abel Frake, a humble farmer taking his prize hog Blue Boy to the State Fair to win the Best of Show ribbon. His producers were so pleased with his performance after the movie wrapped, they offered to have Blue Boy butchered and sell Will the meat. Will appreciated the offer, but demurred because it didn't seem right for him to be dining on his co-star. Will Rogers was also a great political humorist, and as you can tell by some of the jokes that I told during the earlier part, his real talent was he made fun of institutions, he made fun of the way people act, but he didn't make fun of individuals. In fact, Will Rogers' proudest line was, "I never met a man I didn't like." Will Rogers was an adventurous man until the end of his life. In the summer of 1935, he decided to take a trip with his good friend Wiley Post. Wiley was a pioneer aviator who was going to be flying around Alaska in his new float plane. Will figured he could get out of Hollywood during the hottest part of the year and could have some things to write columns about. The unthinkable happened. Wiley Post's plane crashed near Point Barrow. Both men were killed instantly. In death, Will Rogers was mourned as a great American hero. It turns out that Oklahoma's favorite son was actually America's favorite son. There's now a Will Rogers Hospital. There's a Will Rogers Historical Park in Los Angeles on the site of his former home. There's not one but two Will Rogers museums in different towns in Oklahoma. There's even a submarine, the USS Will Rogers. Will Rogers said that the measure of any great man is how much he will be missed. And by that yardstick, Will Rogers was a great man indeed.